Hi, everybody. You're welcome to today's episode of the Tech Talk show with me, Kazeem. Today, I'm happy to welcome Steve Buchanan back on the Tech Talk show. Hi, Steve, and welcome back to the Tech Talk show.
Hi, Kazeem. Thanks for having me on again.
So for those out there who don't know who Steve is, can you please tell us a little bit about you and what you do, Steve?
Yeah, so I'm a former Microsoft MVP, and actually I work for Microsoft now. I'm a principal program manager focused on Azure product improvement. So I'm located in the US, and I'm also an author. So I've authored 8 books. I've been a tech reviewer on a bunch of other books, and I have 14 courses out there in Pluralsight right now. Most of them are around like Kubernetes, like products for Kubernetes, things like Rancher, Argo CD, crosses over into GitOps, and then a bunch of stuff out there on Azure as well. So yeah, I'm involved in community. I like speaking at conferences and user groups, and that's me in a nutshell.
The last time I had you on the show, Steve, you spoke to my audience about the AKS. But today on the show, we're going to be switching gears a little bit, and we're going to be looking at Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes for beginners. If you'd like to learn about some basic AKS stuff and some demos, please, you can check out my last session with Steve. I'll try to put a link to that in the description. All right, so let's delve right in. We have the Azure Arc that a lot of people now know about, which help us to stretch the control plane outside the boundary of Azure. But we also have the Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes. Where does this fit in the picture of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Azure Arc Kubernetes is basically there to extend Azure's capabilities to Kubernetes clusters anywhere you might be running them, right? And it allows you to take the power of Azure and things like Azure Policy, things like Security Center, things like being able to tag and see your Kubernetes clusters in the Azure portal, and you can extend Azure's features and functionality to Kubernetes clusters, even if they're running in like AWS, or maybe you're running them on premises or any other cloud, right? And so Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes is just extending that. And then we also have GitOps in Azure Arc Kubernetes. And so you're able to use that to manage, fleets of Kubernetes clusters. And really, Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes is about being able to manage Kubernetes clusters centrally, no matter where you have your Kubernetes clusters running. And so that's really where the power comes in there.
What are some of those problems that Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes help us solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's say if you're spinning up new Kubernetes clusters and you want to have a specific configuration come down on those Kubernetes clusters because you have standards in your organization and you need them to be managed the same way or have the same configuration every single time, you can have them onboarded into Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes and then have a set of standardized Azure policies, right, for Kubernetes that get laid down on those Kubernetes clusters as soon as they come online, right? So that's definitely a use case there. Also with GitOps, deploying in a much easier centralized way can be facilitated through Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes. Again, wherever your Kubernetes clusters are.
We have the Azure Stack. We also have the AKS, the Azure Kubernetes Services. We also have the Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes. So if you were to touch on all this briefly, what would you say the difference is between these three?
Yeah, so Azure Arc itself is just like it's a service in Azure, right? And there's different parts to Azure Arc. So you have Azure Arc for servers, you have Azure Arc with data, you have Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes, and there's more, right? It just keeps growing and growing, and the team continues to add more there. And so if you had like Azure Arc for servers, for example, basically you're able to manage servers, whether they're Windows or Linux, no matter where those are. Those could be on premises, those could be in another cloud, they could be EC2 instances on AWS, et cetera, right? And same thing, you're able to extend Azure's capabilities to those servers no matter where they are. So it helps give you that centralized management. So that's what Azure Arc is. It's kind of the product, and then you have, and I might not be using official terms here, but you have like sub products for it, right? And Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes is just one of them. And then you have, and we already talked about Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes, kind of what that is, its capabilities, what it's used for. And then you have Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. And what that is it's a managed Kubernetes service that runs on Azure. And so you can go out there and you can spin up AKS, and that gives you a full-blown Kubernetes cluster, and you can start, deploying workloads to it, right? And basically have a Kubernetes cluster that's running in cloud to go ahead and run your workloads. And it gives you all the capabilities you would have with a Kubernetes cluster. But in addition to that, Microsoft is taking the load of management off your plate, most of it off your plate. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about deploying your own cluster, kind of managing the underlying nodes, especially in the control plane. And it takes care of a lot of that for you and combines it with Azure capabilities, things like networking, being able to just check a box to enable monitoring. And then you're able to monitor your Kubernetes cluster as well as the workloads running on that cluster, like your containers. And that data flows into like log analytics. So you get those additional benefits by using AKS.
People use GitOps with the Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes a lot lately. But since I have you here on the show, the AKS guru, I'm sure you can help us understand things better. First, what is GitOps? And would you recommend that we use GitOps with the Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes services? Or are we better to just use the Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes without it?
No, I would recommend actually using GitOps with Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes, definitely. And just to be clear, so GitOps is an operating model pattern for deployment and configuration management of modern workloads. And I say modern workloads because it can be used on modern workloads, not just Kubernetes clusters. Now, there's a misconception out there that GitOps is just for Kubernetes clusters. That's not true. It's actually for modern workloads like cloud workloads. And so there's GitOps operators, and that's software used to facilitate GitOps. Now, GitOps, again, is an operating model, right? And so it's not a software or even a product itself. It's an operating model. It's a pattern. And so you have GitOps operators, and that's a software agent that looks at what you have in a Git repository and then looks at the environment where you're running your workloads, whether that's Kubernetes or even just on cloud, and it will deploy whatever is in your Git repository on your Kubernetes cluster or other, right? And GitOps takes Git and makes that the source of truth. And so you put your desired state in your Git repository, and then your GitOps operator will take and make that desired state so in your environment. And so there's really two popular GitOps operators out there. There's Flux, and that was created by Weaveworks. And then there's Argo CD, and Argo CD was originally developed by a team at Intuit. And both Flux and Argo CD are open source, so they're free. You can go and install them and start using them. And with Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes, we have Flux integrated right into the product. And so when you're in the portal, you'll actually see like GitOps there, and you can, click on that and you can go ahead and configure it and point it to a Git repository. And then what that will do is, if you have your desired state in your Git repository and you have, GitOps configured with Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes, and it's pointed at your managed or your projected Kubernetes cluster, it'll go ahead and put whatever the desired state is down on that Kubernetes cluster. And so think of GitOps as being able to handle the CD, continuous deployment of your CI/CD pipelines. And again, it's typically used for Kubernetes clusters. And so you would write your, Kubernetes manifest files, or you'd have your Helm charts in your Git repository. And then that GitOps operator is going to go ahead and put those things down on your Kubernetes cluster. Now, there's some additional benefits that come with GitOps too, like you give the GitOps operator permission to your Kubernetes cluster. So it's actually running like kube control commands and Helm commands against your Kubernetes cluster. And so you don't have to have your developers access your Kubernetes cluster at that point anymore. They just update the code in the Git repository, and the GitOps operator will make things happen. So you're enhancing security there, and also you get like audit capabilities and rollback, because everything you do is happening through Git. And then if you push something out and it has a negative impact, you can, go back to the previous version, because everything is versioned in Git, right? And you should be going through like pull requests and, having teams look at and verify the code that's in your Git repositories and things like that before you're merging code in. So it gives you the capability to kind of have a closer look on things before they land in production.
In trying to close out now, for those folks out there looking to dig a little deeper, what resources would you recommend?
Yeah, that's another great question. So Microsoft has great documentation out there on just the Azure Stack family. So if you want to learn more about the different Azure Stack products that are in the Azure Stack family, if you want to learn more about Azure Arc, and also if you want to learn more about AKS, just go out to the Microsoft documentation. There's a ton of information out there. There's also Microsoft's Learn site, where there's like free courses and modules that you can look at to learn about this stuff. You can sign up for trials on Azure to get your hands in there and start working with the products. And also, like Weaveworks has a great blog out there where they're always blogging about GitOps. So I'd highly recommend checking out Weaveworks in their blog. And then shameless plug for myself. I actually have 3 books out there. One is on Azure Arc, and I co-authored that with a buddy of mine, John Joyner. Check that out. Also, I have a book out there from O'Reilly that covers Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes. And then I have a book out there on Apress with several co-authors that covers Azure Arc Kubernetes. So you can check those out. You can get those books, dive into those. And then I'm also on Pluralsight. So I have several courses out there. I have one on Azure Arc Enabled Kubernetes. I got one out there on Argo CD that covers, that specific GitOps operator. And then I have one out there for GitOps, the big picture. And that really goes through GitOps, what it is, and can help you get started with GitOps all up. So I recommend like GitOps, the big picture, get started there. That'll take you in, kind of show you what that operating model pattern is. And after you've done that, dive into Argo CD, and that'll take you into more specifics and teach you how to use that with your Kubernetes cluster and start deploying workloads.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Steve. So this is what we have for you today. on the Tech Talk. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. And if you like this video, please be kind enough to give it a thumbs up. So from myself and Steve, now it's a bye-bye, and I'll catch you another time. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Kazeem.
Thank you.